Hey, welcome to today's tutorial. So today we're going to create a custom block for Gutenberg for WordPress. And the point of our block is it's going to connect to OpenAI's, chat API and basically do some work for us. So the concept of the block is basically pretty simple. The block will send all of your article's content to OpenAI and say like, hey, pretend you're a social media manager, create a tweet for this article, include a quote from the article, include the URL to the article, and ChatGPT will take care of that part of it and send it back to you. And then we're going to inject it in here. So you can see here on the screen, I have this block right here where I could generate a new tweet if I'm not happy with it. The default state of the block will basically look like this. It'll just be a button. You'll click, you'll generate a tweet. I've turned on some core support, so like you can do background color, all that sort of stuff. If, I'd probably turn on some typography supports and different things like that. But I don't want to get too involved in this tutorial. For really, the point of this is just to show how do I do things like make an API call, get the content of my post while I'm inside of a block, that sort of stuff. So this is our final block that we'll be building. Pretty simple. I think if I did want to iterate on this, I'd probably make the text here editable so that you could edit the tweet once it comes in. Maybe I'd show a character count or something on the back end. And then on the front end, it just looks like that with a, click to tweet kind of link, and it opens up Twitter with this tweet inside of it. So pretty common, pretty good use case for AI to generate something that's just kind of sticks in the middle. So let's dig into how we're going to build this. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use the WordPress create block package to spin up a new block. So I am in the root of my WordPress website right here. So I'm actually going to jump over to the WP content / plugins folder, and then I'm going to run npx at WordPress create block, and then I'm going to give the name of it, and I'm just calling it example AI block because that's what my directory and repo is going to be. If you already have a plugin where you're doing blocks, you can, you do this in your plugin or something like that, but I'm just going to show how to create your own standalone plugin from scratch. I like to do a namespace, and I just usually do WP dev. And what else? Oh, I'm going to do a dynamic block. You don't actually, there's nothing in this block that really needs to be a dynamic block, but I just like to do a dynamic block because I just feel like it makes life easier to know that I can just write the front end in PHP and that I can change it in the future if I ever need to, and I don't have to worry about the save.js file, which always just really gets in my way. So it's very rare that I don't do a dynamic block. So that's where we're going to start right here. And anything else we need? I think that's it. So let's run that. So npx create block, it's going to, let's make sure we are on node 20 nowadays. Okay. And let's try again with node version 20. Okay. So what npx WordPress create block is going to do, it's going to get that create block package and it's going to bring it to your computer and run it. And what that does is it makes a new plugin directory. It makes a block.json file, makes this package.json file, which has all the build strips and stuff like that. Then it's going to get WordPress /scripts, which is like WordPress's Webpack kind of custom config for building blocks. It makes working inside of the WordPress block editor a lot easier. It's going to get all those files and everything and put it all in there. So what we can do is we can jump over into it, cd example AI block, and I'm going to just open it up in VS Code, and we'll do the rest of the stuff inside of VS Code. So we can get rid of this. I like to use the terminal inside of VS Code because I find it just to be a little bit easier. And I'll make this a little bit bigger. There we go. So I'm in my example AI block, and all I need to do is run npm run. Wait, let's make sure we're on node 20 again. nvm use 20, npm run start, and that's going to start the process of building my block, and it's going to show up inside of WordPress. Oh, and inside of WordPress, I do have to turn it on, so we'll get to that part when we get ahead. So what does this create for us? So we have example AI block. It's just a block folder. So let's hide this little sidebar here. It gives us like a readme.txt file that's kind of generic for a plugin. It gives me a package.json, which just has that build script stuff that we were just looking at, and this one dependency. It gives me the main plugin PHP file. So here I can change the name and the description of the plugin and all this other stuff here. And all the plugin is doing is registering our custom block type. And our custom block type is right here in the source folder. So we're actually going to add a little bit of PHP as well. And here is our block inside of the block folder. Okay, so let's start with our block.json file and let's change a few things. Title, example, AI block. You know what? We're going to leave that. That's all pretty much fine. What we need is we do need to set up some attributes. So you'll see me use Copilot a lot where I'm just going to kind of let it autocomplete things and then change it. That's kind of how I've been working recently. I find that it's a little bit helpful, you know, to just let it get stuff started. So we have attributes, we have content. I'm actually going to call this tweet because then I'm going to remember that. And then we're going to go into our block supports and we're going to say, let's just add color supports for background and text. And we're going to save that. Okay, so we have our color and I don't know why this is formatted all weird. All right, and we're going to do some spacing and we'll say padding true and we'll just say margin. So the block will be able to do color, spacing, and like I said, I think we would do typography settings, other things like that as well, but we're just getting some basics here. Okay, so let's see if we can find our block, example AI block, there we go. And that's that default block that it looks like where they add all the styling and stuff, one of my least favorite features, so let's get rid of all of this styling that they put in by default. Okay. And they also give us a view.js file, which is a JavaScript file, and we just don't need that. So what we're going to do is take it out of our block.json so there's not this extra view.js file loaded every time we use the block. Okay, so let's start building our block, and then we'll start building sort of the infrastructure to get our block going. Okay, so this is the edit.js file. This is essentially what runs when you're editing a block. So it needs to return a few things. It needs to handle any sort of buttons, sidebar controls, any of that sort of stuff. And then it also needs to show the block in the editor, like the actual content of the block. So our actual block is going to just be a div to keep things simple. And we're going to get rid of that. And we also need to get some parameters. You can see here they're being recommended, attributes and set attributes. So we made an attribute that was called tweet. So we can actually get that value and save it and pop it in here. And what we're going to do is we're basically going to say attributes.tweet. And we're going to do a question mark. And then over here, we're going to do another one. And I'll explain this as we put some stuff in it. We're just going to put some fragments here. And one more. Okay. So what's going to happen here is we're basically saying, hey, is there anything in the tweet? You know, like, does our tweet exist? If so, show all this. If not, show this down here. So if there's nothing in our tweet, then what we're going to do is we're going to stick a button and we're going to say on the click of this button, we're just going to pass it a function called generate tweet. And it's just going to be on us to write that function. We're going to do variant equals, let's do secondary. That's the button where it's not a blue solid button, but it gets like a blue outline, and I kind of like that. Let's close this and make sure we put some text here. Generate tweet. And I love how it guesses the namespace, but is like not correct at all. I guess we could put our example. I think AI block is going to be the namespace. And close out the button. Oh, that shouldn't be a closing tag. There we go. If there's no tweet, show this button. And when we click it, generate a tweet, and it's a secondary variant and it has some text in it. And what that means is we need to do a few things. One is we need to write the generate tweet function, which I'm just going to put right there to remind ourselves to write that later. So that's our function. The second thing is we need to actually pull this button component from somewhere. So this is where we start importing things, and we're going to import button from WordPress/components, which is a component library, has all the different like UI things, buttons, cards, modal, lists, all these different things to match the block editor's design. So we're going to import that button. So if we have a tweet, then what we probably want to do is show the tweet, right? So we can actually just make a paragraph, whoops, and we'll just attributes.tweet. And if we have the tweet, show it. If we don't, show a button. Okay, so we have our generate tweet button in our example AI block. Okay, so we have the button, we have the block. So the next step is to connect to OpenAI's API and actually have it run this command. And I'll be honest with you, I'm just sort of experimenting with this. So the prompt that I will use probably is terrible. At least it definitely was called out to me. on Twitter that it was not a great prompt, which I understand. So definitely don't take advice from me on the prompt. This is just for how you would structurally set it up. So to connect to OpenAI, we connect through their API. So we need two things. One is we need the API key somewhere. And number two is we need to make that API call. We need to make that remote call. Now, the thing about it is, number one, where do you want to store your API key? I want to make it very clear that you never put your API keys to anything ever in your code. So don't include it in your plugin as code. You have to have a place for somebody to define their API key. The simplest one, and what I'm going to do, is to just say, go to your wp/config file and add your API key there by the same way you define everything else in WP config. This is the README file for this repository, and you can see you just do like a define and you put that in your WP config file, so we can just look for this. And that's what we're going to do in this example. If you wanted to get fancy or have it so that it was, more of a UI to put in an API key, you can either, number one, make a new settings page in WordPress. You do that, a new page here for your API key. Number two is you could make it part of the setting in the block, but you do not want to store it in your block attributes, because then it's going to be stored literally in the markup of the HTML. Like if I trick the code, all of your attributes show up here in the comment. So you do not want to do that. You would actually have to use Gutenberg's settings API, and you would still make a setting, and maybe they could input it in the block, but it would actually send it to the API and store it there. So it's definitely a different way to do it. I'm going to stick with just WP config. That's what we're going to do. The second piece is we have to actually go talk to it. Now, you could, in theory, do it from the JavaScript. We could do it right here in the edit.js, but I would have to pass my key, my API key, into the block somewhere, and then I would, use that API key to make the connection. I personally don't like doing that because I really don't think you should ever send your API keys to the client-side JavaScript. If we were doing this, some sort of server-side JavaScript situation, that would be okay. But this is client-side JavaScript. This is JavaScript that's going to be running in, the user who's using this plugin. It's going to be running in their header. So they would make that API key public to anybody using the block. So imagine if you made this plugin and then you invited somebody else to be an author on your website, they could technically get your API key by adding this block, because we'd have to pass it somehow. So we don't ever really want to do that. The solution here is we're going to make a custom REST API endpoint. It sounds hard, but I promise it's not too many lines of code. We're going to make a custom REST API endpoint to handle talking to OpenAI. And that way, it's going to all happen at the server level, at the PHP level, and then we're not worried about that security of that API key. So let's start there. What I'm going to do is namespace this. Let's just call it WP dev. I like to do a namespace so then I don't have to think about prefixing all my functions like this, because that gets old. So register our REST endpoint. So this is just a standard function. Copilot's already got an example for us. So this looks pretty good. I can just actually do a get, technically, WP dev. Let's just say example AI block v1, and we'll say get data is our REST, and then callback is get data. So what we're saying here is register a new endpoint on the WordPress REST API. It'll be example AI block /v1, and this particular one will be /get data. And the reason it's broken into two right here is so that maybe this is something that I save as like a global, variable somewhere, and then I can I can just reuse it over and over. And then this particular endpoint is called get data. And it's some stuff about the endpoint. The callback is basically the function that's going to run. And the last piece we need is what's called a permission callback. Now, a permission callback is who's allowed to access this endpoint. And if I pass return true, it means that literally anybody could hit this REST API endpoint on my website, and that would actually trigger, a call to OpenAI, and that would not be good because that's going to cost money. And so I don't want to be public. I don't want anybody to be allowed to hit this. It has to be somebody who's allowed to. So what we're going to do is we're going to write a function that returns some sort of permission. And in our case, current user can edit posts is a perfect permission, because It's for somebody who's allowed to write posts, edit posts. They might get to use this block. Anybody else would not get to use this block, or this endpoint wouldn't work for them. Anybody who's logged out is not going to pass this permissions check. So that's kind of a good permission. You could also, if you're really worried about your tokens getting used, you can pass it something higher like manage options, which would mean only an administrator could run it. So you definitely have some options there, and that just does all the security logic. And now this is a private endpoint, and we just need to add the action, and the action here is REST API in it. And let's see if Copilot can write is that right? Nope, that is not even close. Register our REST endpoint. Okay, so now we need to write this function right here. Okay, so let's go through a few things I did here. First is I'm checking for that OpenAI key that we talked about in our WP config file. Basically, is there an API key defined? Because if there's not, we don't need to return anything. We just need to return an error, a new WP REST response error. So in that case, and in fact, there we go. And let's put the request here. So what's going to happen is this URL is going to get hit, and it's going to get a request of all the data. And so we're actually going to have to pass it a few parameters. We're going to pass it the post content, the title of the post, and the permalink of the post. And the reason why is those are going to be useful pieces of information to generate the tweet, and we're going to need to pass those. So we check to make sure that our OpenAI key doesn't exist. And then next, what we're going to do is we're going to grab the content, the title, and the permalink from here. And if they don't exist, we'll just return empty strings because maybe we don't need all of them in the future. Next, what I want to do is strip out any HTML from the content. And that just makes it smaller and faster. And there's actually a lot of really cool optimizations you can do here. There's no video of it, but there's a great talk at WordCamp Phoenix this year all about how you can strip out stuff from your post content when you send it to an AI, and it makes it cheaper for you because it doesn't really need the HTML tags. We're going to do this, and we're actually going to be nice, and we're going to use WP strip all tags and not just the regular strip tags. Okay, so we're going to get rid of all of our HTML out of the content and just try to lean it up a little bit. Now let's generate our prompt. So here's the prompt that I have that, again, is not a great example of a prompt. Basically saying, hey, read the article and generate a tweet with one interesting quote from the article, and includes the link. And here's the permalink. The article's named. Here's the content. I could probably streamline this down too, because that also costs money. And so there's really a lot of stuff around optimizing it, but we're just talking WordPress today. So now we need to talk to OpenAI. And so right here we have WP remote post, and this is not the one that I used. I actually just use the generic chat completions. We're going to actually pick a model, and I've been doing GPT 4.0-mini, and instead of prompt, we're going to do is messages. And so first we're going to do a system prompt and then a role. So basically first we're going to say, hey, you're the social media manager for a large company. Maybe I would change this to for a large blog or something like that. You would ask to generate a tweet based on the following article, and then our prompt here. And then also just our headers. So you can see here, we're passing it the API key and including that as part of the request. So this is going to send this to OpenAI. It's going to tell you what model, it's going to run all of this, and we're going to get a response back. Okay, so let's walk through the rest of this function. First, we're just going to check if we got an error, some sort of error, anything just happened wrong with the request. Then we're going to return a REST API response. And you basically have an array. When you return REST API responses, you have like an array where you can just put a bunch of data. So sometimes I like to send the response back so I can see what the problem was or something like that. Maybe I would do that during development. I'd turn it off during production. And then some sort of error code or something like that. If I do a 200, that means it's success. If I do 400, 500, those are errors. So if there's an error, drop out. Otherwise, grab the body of the response so I can decode it because it's made out of JSON and I want to decode it. And if there's some error here, again, return a response. That's an error. And notice that I'm using the same convention. Probably I would end up using some sort of a function wrapper for a lot of this stuff to make sure everything works the same way. But right now I'm just kind of doing it all programmatically so you can kind of just see how it works. Now we want to pull our choices out of the data. So you can go to the documentation of OpenAI and you can kind of see how their AI API works. They do a lot of examples in like Python and stuff, but you can kind of get an example of what comes back. They tell you like tokens and stuff, that might be for interesting information. They tell you about the choices, and these are kind of all the things that happened. And usually you're just looking for that choice and you're looking for that message. Maybe you're going to write this so that it brings back 3 different options and you're going to let the user pick. That's definitely something you could do as well. So we're just looking for the choices. We just want to make sure there is a choice, that it exists, and it's not just an empty array. So we're just kind of doing a lot of this kind of boring checking of stuff, making sure that it actually gave us back some sort of like message content. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes you don't have enough tokens and that sort of thing. So there's a lot there. Then when we get back our response, we want to make sure we remove the prompt, just in case sometimes the prompt comes back in the response, and any sort of word tweet, anything like that. And just kind of cleaning up the text. So you're just basically like stripping out all the other stuff. And then at this point, we can just return the tweet as a successful REST API response. And so what's going to happen is we're actually going to just hit this endpoint. We're going to pass it this data, and it's going to come back with a tweet or with some error messages. All right, so let's jump back into the JavaScript side. Let's figure out a few different things. One is we need to get the title, the content, and the permalink from like the global state of the WordPress React application. This used to be a lot more cumbersome, and it's gotten very easy nowadays. You can kind of just do it in one line. And then we're just going to make our request. So first, let's get the title. And we're going to use something called use entity prop. And this is basically saying what post type, and we're in the post type. In this case, we might actually want to grab the post type to make this work in other post types. Right now, it's going to only work in the post type. And we want the title. We also want the content. So we want the same thing. And then we want the link. And this is one of those things where they call it link because that's what it's called in the REST API. And it's very annoying because you just want to say permalink, and for whatever reason, they just decided to like call things different things. So that's always fun. And then use entity prop actually comes from the core data WordPress package, and there's no way anyone can remember that. So thank you, Copilot, for doing that correctly. So what's going to happen is it's basically grabbing this information, and actually the way this really works is it passes a separate function called set title, and that's the same for all 3 of these, where you can actually change that data. So if we wanted to, we could, change the title, change the content, that sort of stuff. So that's what these are for. So we just needed those 3 things. Another thing we're going to need is API fetch. Actually, this one doesn't come in. And API fetch is basically a version of fetch, that tool that you would use to make, remote requests in JavaScript, but it's kind of handles all of the WordPress validation and stuff like that. So I don't need to worry about nonces and security and all that stuff. It's going to handle all of that for me. And we're going to do that right in here. So we're going to API fetch our URL. So we'll start with the path. And I think we actually called it get data, which now that I look at that, generate tweet was probably a better name for it. And then we just need some parameters. So I'm just going to say params. Actually, let's back up. Let's make our parameter object first. There we go. Title, content, and I think we actually called it permalink in our thing. So these are the 3 things we need to send to right here, right? So that's where they're going to show up. And to do that, we're just going to pass them as part of this. And we're going to use a function called add query args from WordPress/URL. We're going to copy add query args, and we're going to use it right here. And the way it works is you pass the URL and the parameters, and it's just going to attach them as, query arguments. Then if we get our response, we're actually going to use this. We're going to set our attribute of tweet to the tweet that comes back in the response. Or if we get some sort of error, we'll just console log out the error for now. So what's going to happen is whenever this function runs, it's going to hit the API, pass in all that data, and then it's going to generate a tweet. And if we get a good tweet back, it's going to set that tweet as the attribute, which means that attributes.tweet ? Is going to change to showing the tweet instead of showing the button. Okay, so let's test it out. Let's also open our console just to see. It's going to run. Add query args is not a function. I'm Add query args is not a function, so I must have imported that incorrectly. Oh, that's weird. That was weird. Import add query args. There we go. Let's do a little click and reload to generate the tweet. It's running, and boom, our tweet is here. And that's our tweet. Oh yeah, we didn't console anything out. But if we look in our network tab, I can see that we made the request right here to get data. So you can see we sent it the title, the content, and the permalink, and then it returned back just the tweet. So when you're working on this kind of stuff, sometimes it's helpful to, in your API endpoint, return some other data and stuff. Like maybe I wanted to see like what the full request was, and then I can dig in here and I can kind of test and play around with it. And that's super handy if you want to just like see a little deeper on what's coming back in your API endpoints. Okay, cool. So that worked. It generated the tweet. I can decorate it. I can give it some padding. You know, I could turn on some more supports and stuff like that. I can hit save. So just a few last things we need to do. Number one is we need to actually show it on the front end. So we need to go to our render.php and we can get rid of, we'll do escape HTML, but at this point what we'll do is we'll say $attributes / tweet, because now we have access to all of our tweet attributes. And if you are ever unclear, there's this link right here that you can click on and it shows you exactly what's available in your render.php file, these three functions right here. So something to keep in mind. So we can do that. I also make sure I echo. And then, you know, I think in my design, I have some sort of a click to tweet here or something like that. So I might have a link. I'm not going to really generate it right now, but it would be a link that says, you know, click to tweet. I would make this text translatable as well. And then I'd style all of this and that sort of thing. So that's pretty much like the full working version of this. But there's one other thing that I kind of want to do, which is what happens if I generate the tweet. Let's go back to our example, and I don't like it and I want to regenerate it. Well, what I'll do is I'll add a button right up here to the toolbar that basically says like generate a fresh tweet. So that way that everybody has like the ability to change their tweet. So what we're going to import is something called block controls. And that's where it's a slot where you can put it into your block, and then anything you put in between it will get added to that toolbar, because that toolbar is just called block controls. And so nice, Copilot's kind of generating it automatically for me. Button, on click, generate tweet, variant equals secondary. All of that looks good, except that in the toolbar, you have to actually use something called toolbar button and not just a regular button. So I'm going to import that from the components library. All this stuff where like this comes from this library, this comes from this library. Crazy, crazy, crazy. But there we go. So let's save that. So if there is a tweet, it should show up as a toolbar. And I don't think there's a variant option here. I think it's just a button. You can also do an icon or something. Okay, let's do a little refresh. And there we go. So there's a generate tweet button available in the toolbar, but on a new version of it where there's no tweet in the attributes, it's not there. So cool. This, and you know, with this kind of idea of this button, I could actually add this button, something like this, to any block. Like I could actually just take the core paragraph block and add, you know, a generate tweet, or another block that would be probably great for this is the pull quote block. I could have a button up here that says like generate pull quote from the article, and it would just read the article, grab the pull quote, and stick it in here into the actual block. So there's lots of cool things you could do with modifying the editor, and I think that's kind of covers everything. Yeah, so that's kind of a high-level overview of how you would add an AI integration into your custom block. Just to kind of go over it one last time is, you know, I think it's important to have somewhere where you can save the API key, whether it's by defining it in your WP config or settings. Don't put it in your code. Make those interactions with external APIs always happen at the server level, meaning they happen in PHP. I don't ever really recommend doing them directly in JavaScript unless you absolutely need to, but it's really best to do it this way because no user is going to be able to see any of this key. It's all going to happen at the server level, and it just means requiring, you know, a custom REST API endpoint. But as you can see, it's actually not too much code. Once you get used to it, it gets pretty easy to spin up these custom endpoints when you need them and to roll out security, with one line of code right here. And then finally, in your block, you just can take advantage of all of the different packages that are part of the block editor. Things like use entity prop, which lets you pull, the post data. It's kind of the get post of the JavaScript world. You can do things like get entities where you're getting like multiple posts. You can get other posts from your site, things like that. So there's a lot of cool stuff. And then API fetch, which is going to let us hit our REST API endpoint, handle all the security, handle everything for us, and we don't even have to worry about passing it any nonces or anything like that. And then we just have some nice UI components coming out of Gutenberg that we can use to build our block. So hopefully this was helpful. Hopefully this gives you some idea of how you might do an API integration into your custom block. And if you do have any questions, put them in the comments below. And please like this video before you go so that others can see it as well.